So this week I just wanted to play with maybe some collage work and just taking some motifs from different fabrics and putting them together in maybe a fall scene or something about Halloween or something, because I love this time of year. So what I did was I took fabrics. I just kind of ran through really quickly and grabbed a few fabrics that I liked, that I thought kind of reminded me of fall. And as I grabbed, I was kind of thinking night blooming, flowers with this dark background of the navy. In the middle here, this is going to be my 6.5-inch background square. So then I took the fabrics that I chose to go with it, and I just cut little motifs out, really rough cut these little guys out. I may not use them all, but they're options, So what I'm going to do now, because I'm just going to play here, I'm not going to worry about anything perfection or folding things under or doing anything like that. We're just playing. This is a sheet of Print and Piece Fuse Light, where it's got fusible sticky stuff on the one side. So what I'm going to do is take this over to my ironing service and just place different motifs on here. That way, when I cut them out on the line, they'll be fused. I'm going to use serrated scissors and they'll be fused, and then I can just hand stitch them down where I want them, glue them down, and then hand stitch them down. So what I'm doing is just placing everything that I might use on this sheet here. And I will put a piece of Teflon, or you can use parchment paper over the top, and then I'll iron it all down. Then I'll cut out each motif on the line and then start playing and arranging them on this background fabric. Okay, so let's start with the moon. I've got a shimmery gold fabric here, and then some of the yellow with some branches on it. Just thought it would be interesting to do sort of a little crescent moon here. Now I used a one-sided fusible, and of course, as I noted, you can use a double-sided. Steam a Seam Light 2 is really great. But this is a one-sided that I just have with me. So this is fused to the back of the fabric. So what I'm going to have to do is just glue the pieces down in a few spots while I stitch, just to keep them in place. But if you use a double-sided, of course, once you get the arrangement that you like, you can just press it down to the back of your fabric and then stitch to your heart's content. Next up, I had this fabric that had little deer antlers, but I turned them into branches, and I put this little owl on in front of the moon, which I love. And then I cut this huge flower out of a different fabric and put a little skull, like a blooming skull flower. Kind of love that. This all came together really quickly. Like, I really didn't play around too much. I just was like, as you cut, your mind is going to be like, oh, I could put this here. And you just try it. And if you like it, yay. If not, you just rearrange. And it's really fun. But make sure you take pictures of your progress as you go and the things that you like, so that you can refer back to them when you take this all off to redo. And then here I put a little flower on that little skull and got some spider webs going, and in the lower left did some more like little floral motifs, and then did an oak leaf in the moon, and then put a little tiny spider hanging from that branch. And as I'm looking at this, it's interesting because they're kind of popping up, they're bending up from the fabric, and they're creating these really cool shadows. So I think what I want to do is actually put these not directly on the fabric, but go one step further and do some Peltex pieces. I've got all these little pieces of one-sided very heavy stabilizer called Peltex that I keep everything, of course, and this is why. So these little pieces are going to be perfect to put on all these little Peltex scraps that I have. And I think what I'll do is I'll glue the backs of these pieces to the non-fusible side of the Peltex. Then once I'm happy, I will fuse the Peltex side down to the fabric and then stitch them so that the elements of this fabric become more dimensional and sort of pop off the background. So I've done a little bit of play with this, but I haven't done very much. So we'll see how this works. I think I'm going to get a little bit of shrinkage, but maybe I'll put some batting in the background, because I know that this block already, I love it. I'm going to hang it. This is going to be a Halloween decoration for the trailer. So I am going to go ahead and do that. Again, gluing these fused motifs to the non-fusible side of the Peltex, and then taking those dimensional pieces and pressing them onto the background, and then I will begin the stitching. Be stitching these down, but I don't want to risk seeing any of the white edges on the Peltex, so I'm going to take a minute and run a Sharpie along the edges just in case. The fabric will come up to meet the stitches generally, so I shouldn't get too much white peeking through, but I'm just covering my bases here. Okay, so now that all the pieces are glued onto the non-fusible side of the Peltex, I can begin cutting out the shapes. I've placed my background block on an 8-inch piece of wool felt for maybe a frame or a place to put some ribbon trim or facing when the block is complete. I could even turn the edges under too when it's done, but be mindful of that because you have to leave a 1/2 inch seam allowance unstitched so that you can be able to tuck the 1/4 inch seam under. But this block is pretty busy, so I think the facing is the direction I'll go. You know, I'm going to need all the room that I can get here, so I'm just going to leave my 1/4 inch seam and put a facing or trim or something around it. But I didn't put the moon on Peltex, of course, because I wanted that to be flush with the fabric and recede into the background. So I just glued the moon where I wanted it, used 1 strand of DMC floss to work a blanket or a buttonhole stitch around the moon and also on the inner edge of the crescent. When working a blanket stitch, of course, make sure always that your thread is under the needle before pulling it through, and keep that needle really, really close to the edge of the applique, in this case my moon, so I don't, the line of the buttonhole, it edges right against the applique. Like I don't want to see any of the background between the applique and my stitching. So as I'm working, I'm thinking, oh, maybe I could have placed all of the fabric just directly on the Peltex without that extra step of that print-in piece fuse light. But in the end, I decided that it was a good idea to just fuse them all first on that product, as it kept the fabric stiffer for handling. The edges wouldn't fray as I'm handling them, and the glue wouldn't seep through the fabric and make any potential spots. So I concluded that just taking that extra step with the original fusible wasn't such a bad idea. Plus, depending on the fabric that you want to blend into the background, you may not want to put some of your pieces on Peltex. In fact, you may not want to put any of your pieces on Peltex, which is fine. I just had this idea and I'm just experimenting here with this. Okay, so now that the moon is stitched on, I've heat set the next layer of applique in place with my iron as the sticky side of that Peltex is facing down. Now this takes a little bit more time with the iron as the pieces are thicker, but one hint is if you press the fabric first to get the fabric hot, then place the applique down and then press it with the iron, it holds a little bit quicker. So to stitch them down this time, I'm going to use 2 strands of a few different colors of DMC just to enhance the edges of the fabric and hold them in place. Since this piece is getting thicker, I'm just going to work little stab stitches rather than the buttonhole or the blanket stitch because I just didn't want to risk that line of the buttonhole. I have no idea where that's going to lay since these pieces are elevated, so I just wanted to be consistent. This way the pieces are still held firmly, and I've got my little Sharpie shadows, so I know no white will show at all. So I just came up through the background right next to the applique piece and make a stitch into the applique about a 1/4 inch away from the edge. And then just keep your eye on your chosen spacing for consistency. I'm working like an 1/8 inch away from each other here. So here's the first layer all stitched down. I was just being mindful of my 1/4 inch seam allowance around so I don't have any bulk in the seam allowance when I go to face it or trim it. And then I heat set the rest of the pieces, getting ready for more stitching goodness. And then boom, my Halloween night blooming block is finished. I will probably find some sort of fun Halloween trim and stitch it to the felt and also covering those 1/4 inch seams and then just hang it up just in time for one of my favorite holidays. I want to thank you so much for joining me for the 6-inch summer block series. I have had so much fun connecting with you guys again and seeing your lovely work come through. Speaking of, here are a few blocks from your fellow stitchers I get to show off this week. Mary's fall wool applique block is just amazing. She even did a beaded bead in the center. This will make a gorgeous journal cover for sure. Well done, Mary. And how cool is Sarah's wool block where she turned the corners and placed a bead to hold those corners down? I love that effect. And I love her inspired fabric. What a great choice. This flower is such a pretty piece to be framed. So I love this. Well done, Sarah. And then Trish went beautifully festive. Her center fabric is incredible and she has enhanced it with beads. I love the shape of the center cutout design and the stitching is just sublime on this. Debbie is working hard on her blocks too. She's playing catch up. She is seriously mastering the art of dimensional crochet flowers, I would say. I love the garden trellis lines that she used for her faux Irish lace instead of, meandering through. This looks super effective. And what a great way to use up buttons. You guys are all so amazing. I can't thank you enough for following along and sharing your beautiful work. I will get that digital Unity quilt all complete when I get a minute, and I'll add it to the Mandala Unplugged Facebook group so we can all admire all of the work that we've done together. So now summer has come to an end, and so is our block program. It has been so much fun, but now I've got to go into hibernation and be tucked into our little property here this winter, writing patterns, making gifts, upping the Etsy store, teaching here locally in Canyon City, and coming up with another fun project for us. But stay tuned as we'll be sharing my boyfriend Jerry's first quilt making journey. He has decided he wants to make a quilt following my book. And as we go through the superhero fabric we got from my friend Gail's garage sale, he is getting inspired to make a Marvel quilt. I'll be sharing his journey here on this channel every Sunday, so tune in and watch this newbie create a quilt with no quilt making skills whatsoever. He's just got my book and some gentle guidance from me. But please keep sharing your photos if you're working through the blocks. Of course, I'll add them to the videos coming up. Thank you again so much for joining me. I'll leave you with a little trailer of what's to come and the beginning of Jerry's journey. But be well. Happy holidays, and I will be back soon with a new project. Stay in touch. Peace and love to all of you. So, you want to make your first quilt?
Yes.
I present to you my book, Quilt As Inspired.
Yay.
I'll sign it later for you.
Thank you.
So, you're going to attempt to do this quilt
by myself. With the teacher here, but I'm not allowed to ask questions.
Yes, you are.
No.
You're going to have questions. It's going to be crazy.
Oh, no. Oh, it has pictures. Thank God, it should be good.